Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a late show again tonight, and it is predicated on a question I asked back in May after this government's budget and the accumulating deficits that are being drawn on this country. But the government at the time, its Parliament Secretary, told me that there wasn't a problem. Canada's still very highly rated in the world, and it's still the best finance country in the world. Well, let's address some of that in this question here. Canada now has a growth rate of about 1.2%. This is according to international bodies like the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and the International Monetary Fund, 1.2% per year. Not exactly stellar, considering that the OECD itself is about 3.8% a year. We've got to do better in this country. But more than that, really looking at these numbers, Canada has a huge productivity problem. Such a productivity problem vis-a-vis the United States, our main trading partner, that between 2022 and 2023, the U.S. economy, GDP per capita, actually went up by 3.6%, whereas in Canada, our GDP per capita went down by over 5%. And how did that happen? That happened because bad economic policies, frankly, that punish successful companies across Canada, but also, you know, we still grow our GDP, but not our GDP per capita because we've got 2.4 million new Canadians. If you looked at GDP per capita, minus 5% plus would mean we're actually in a recession. So did we avoid a recession by saying there's a whole bunch more people? And of course, people means spending. Spending means GDP. It's the nature of what the economy is. That is not the way to run an economy. Our economy is falling down as far as our productivity goes, as far as the value add that we earn as a country. Now, this is interesting because in 10 years ago, 2013, you look at our productivity in Canada vis-a-vis the United States, and Canada's GDP per capita at that point in time was about 98% of the U.S.'s GDP per capita. And what is it now, Madam Speaker? It is 66% per capita. So it's fallen down by almost a third vis-a-vis our main trading partner. That's a disastrous decade that this Liberal government has foisted upon this country. But looking forward, which is the most important thing, we've got to look at how this country reverts back to being a productive economy and how we actually get back to standing in the world so that we're once again a world leader. Ray Dalio is a fund manager, a very important hedge manager in the United States, well regarded as far as his views on income equality and that importance in the economy. And he looks at Canada in a realm of 35 countries and assesses us at number 26 out of 35 as far as our growth over the next 10 years goes. And that's because of all kinds of issues, including the lack of education funding, the lack of ability to actually grow the country, but primarily the excessive debt we've built into this economy. Now it looks at Canada's 1.2% growth per year over the next 10 years. The top, of course, is India at 6.3% annual growth, but the 9 countries below Canada are all difficult European countries, and we know Europe's economy is in the sewer and isn't going to emerge for quite a while because of bad energy policies. So I'm going to ask this government again, when are they going to address the stress they've caused in the financial markets and actually stop spending so much? You've got a spending problem, get a hold of it, and address inflation before it punishes Canadians even more than it already has.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I did not have an opportunity to respond to a question during question period today because the Conservatives have no economic questions, Madam Speaker. I'm so grateful to the member for Calgary Centre for his question tonight because, in fact, the Bank of Canada is leading the G7 in interest rate cuts. Canada was the first G7 country to lower interest rates for the very first time. We were also the first country among all of the G7 peers to cut interest rates for the second time. And yes, Madam Speaker, we were also the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the third time. And let me tell you why this is good news for Canadians. This is helping business owners, those who have loans and those who don't. This is helping Canadians who have a mortgage coming up for renewal. And this is helping people looking to buy a very first home. You know what else is helping Canadians buy a first home? The reforms that our government just announced. For example, we're expanding eligibility for 30-year mortgage amortizations to all first-time homebuyers and also, importantly, to all buyers of new builds. This will help reduce the cost of monthly mortgage payments and help more Canadians buy a home. You know what else is helping Canadians buy a first home? The first home savings account we introduced to allow prospective homebuyers to save up to $40,000 completely, totally tax-free in order to put a down payment towards their first home. In fact, 750,000 Canadians, you heard right, Madam Speaker, 750,000 Canadians have already taken advantage of that program and opened their account. What else is helping Canadians? Well, Madam Speaker, for 19 consecutive months, wage growth has outpaced inflation. That means that even taking into account global inflation, even taking into account affordability pressures, Canadians are still better off today than they were 5 years ago. They are taking home larger paychecks, even taking into account inflation. And talking about inflation, Madam Speaker, I must tell Canadians the truth. Inflation is down to just 2%. The fact that my Conservative colleague is bringing up a question he posed last May shows that they are not following the inflation numbers, Madam Speaker. Inflation is exactly at the target rate that the Bank of Canada had set for itself. Le député d'en face semble s'inquiéter de l'inflation, Madame la Présidente, mais permettez-moi de lui rappeler que l'inflation était de 2% au mois d'août. C'est tout à fait au milieu de la fourchette cible de la Banque du Canada en matière d'inflation. En effet, l'inflation s'est située à l'intérieur de la fourchette cible de la Banque du Canada tout au long de cette année. Les salaires, pour leur part, ont dépassé l'inflation pendant 19 mois consécutifs, ce qui signifie que les travailleurs canadiens reçoivent aujourd'hui en moyenne des chèques de salaire plus élevés, même en tenant compte de l'inflation, qu'ils ne l'étaient avant la pandémie. Les experts prévoient en outre que le PIB du Canada connaîtra la croissance la plus rapide parmi tous nos pairs des pays du G7 en 2025. Cela montre que l'économie canadienne est forte et résiliente et cela montre que le plan économique que nous avons mis en place est fiscalement responsable. Alors que les conservateurs continuent de réclamer des coupures dans les mesures de soutien dont dépendent les Canadiens, notre plan permettra à la prochaine génération de réaliser le rêve d'acheter leur première maison. Madame la Présidente, de ce côté-ci de la Chambre, du côté du gouvernement libéral, nous savons que le Canada est plus fort lorsque tout le monde a les mêmes chances de réussir. Merci.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Canada has dropped its interest rate. Bank of Canada has dropped it 3 times in a row now, and it's led the world because Canada's economy is leading the world in going down. So, of course, we're entering an absolute recession here, not just a GDP per capita recession, but the recession is on the horizon here. I hope it doesn't happen. Nevertheless, we do have something on the horizon here. We have an economy that is stalled and has been stalled for a long time. You take a look at 1.2% growth. That is not the type of growth this country should be going through. Here's the issue. Canadian government debt now is 107% of GDP. And that Parliamentary Secretary will refute that because she's monkeying around with the numbers. In addition, Canadian debt per capita, household debt, is 132% per capita. We've got a debt problem in Canada. It's going to land in the backs of Canadians one way or another. Will the government please address this and stop loading more debt onto the backs of Canadians? Thank you.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And unfortunately, my Conservative colleague seems to be cheering on the idea of a recession, which would be bad news for Canadians. In fact, as I've explained, Canada is projected to have the highest growth rate of our G7 peers in 2025, just next year, Madam Speaker. And I would also note that the Conservatives' desperation for bad economic news is not working very well for them, because Canadians understand that, in fact, they are in a strong economy, and they are seeing their wages increase, Madam Speaker. I would like to correct the member who mentioned yesterday, I believe that the Conservatives are enjoying making a comparison to Alabama's GDP. Canada's GDP is $2.138 trillion, Madam Speaker. Alabama's is $242 billion. So if anybody is monkeying around with the numbers, it is my colleague from Calgary Centre. I do wish to end simply by stating hoping that our government will continue to fight for vulnerable Canadians while maintaining a fiscally responsible frame. Thank you, Madam Speaker.